Okay, Carson, have you watched the entirety of Cowboy Bebop yet, or do you think you'll need a little bit more time?
I need a little more time. I did acquire it on my home lab, so it is now waiting, sitting on a server waiting for me to watch it.
Okay, so yeah, you have exceeded in that short amount of time. As we're recording this, it's less than 24 hours since we heard the Cowboy Bebop band closing out the Vancouver International Jazz Festival. So you're on it.
I'm on it. I'm heeding the call, as they say.
That is good. I have to rewatch it too because it has been since I was a young teenager since I saw it. So I don't really remember anything. So I'm basically as out of it as you are, and I really shouldn't be pointing fingers when it comes to Cowboy Bebop. But that was the very, very end of a very fun festival time, which I mostly had to myself because you were elsewhere. And we corresponded about it, but you jumped in at the end and we had a good hang there with some friends on the last day, July 1st. But you were at an entirely different music festival yourself.
I got to go to the Telluride Bluegrass Festival in Colorado. Main impetus to see Punch Brothers, who we talked about in the last episode as my recommendation. And they were awesome. Every band I saw there was awesome. It was a big drive from Denver to get there, but yeah, highly recommend. I mean, travel to from Canada to the US if you're watching this, you're Canadian. A little bit dicey maybe right now, but I'm glad I went. I had a really nice time.
Yeah, you made it. It was even warmer than the kind of cloudy festival that we had, at least until the end. And then, July 1st, we were blasted with it. I played on the Sunday and it was also getting nice at that point. So that was good. But I think I went to 42 shows since June 20th.
42 is crazy in that amount of time.
Parts or whole. Yeah, good. Parts included.
Good on you.
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said about the Jazz Fest that I'll say at Rhythm Changes for sure. But it was nice that we had some festival times. We got to take a break. We're back. We have a lot to talk about. A lot of stuff happened. There's one thing I wanted to queue up first, though, because it relates to the festival that I just spent all my waking hours at. Now, the Vancouver Jazz Festival, in recent years, as you know, because we played there too, you and I and another friend, Francis Henson, we played in his trio on Granville Island in Vancouver 2 years ago. My gig at the festival this year was also on Granville Island. And I want to pose the rhetorical question to you to kick this off. Do you know why, in recent years, the festival has increasingly found its home on Granville Island?
Well, because I know a little bit about what we're going to talk about, I'm going to guess it's a funding thing. I guess it's quite affordable for the festival to book because the festival has lost its bigger title sponsor. And so Granville Island, I imagine, is probably the easiest place to book. And that's why there's the free shows there.
Yeah, because there's a kind of space that you will find several of on Granville Island. Some of the ones that the Jazz Festival uses are called Performance Works, Ocean Art Works, the Review Stage, that you don't find in many other places, especially in Vancouver's city center.
Yeah. And
what we're going to talk about is related to why and what might threaten that and so on. But the fact is, the festival is an enormous beneficiary of Granville Island. And if you're listening and you haven't been there, I wonder how we could succinctly describe what Granville Island is from our own experiences living in the Vancouver area before we talk about this very well-produced YouTube video is prompting this segment. Do you want to try and take a stab at that? And I'll jump into what is your sense of Granville Island and how you could describe it to a normie, not from like the big angle that we would talk about, but just from what it's like to live here.
Well, I guess I have the outsider's perspective because I didn't grow up here. So I have Granville Island is similar to like Seattle's Pike Place Market or I'm trying to think of another equivalent. There's the one in Toronto, which is kind of has a similar vibe. is maybe best known for its public market, where people can come. It's not actually an island, but it's kind of a pretty market space. Great views of Yaletown from the south side across the water there. It's quite like a busy touristy spot. There's often shows there. There's an improv theater there. Colin Mockery started, believe he started Vancouver Theatre Sports League. And so when I was a kid coming to visit Vancouver, it was always like one of the highlights of the trip is getting to go to Granville Island, maybe eating lunch, seeing a show of some sort on these school trips I would do down from Smithers. So that's my experience of it. Having lived here, I confess I don't go to Granville Island very much because it's a bit touristy and a bit chaotic, which is not usually my speed. So I go for the Jazz Fest once or twice a year and kind of avoid it besides that.
That's lovely that you took such a positive angle of it being a destination, because as a local, I can tell you that the first thing that everybody thinks about when it comes to Granville Island is that it's impossible to get to
Yes.
in a timely fashion. However, you yourself recently had a great experience that elucidated this for you, and it involved us meeting up yesterday.
I very foolishly thought I might be able to park on Canada Day when there were free shows happening on Granville Island, and was immediately stuck in a line of traffic that was not really moving. And I thought I was about to miss the show, and I did not manage to park. I still have to do the whole loop around the island to get out of that line of cars. But I did park elsewhere and learned my lesson, which I've learned in the past before. I knew as soon as I got on the line that I screwed up.
Yeah, Granville Island is not a car-free place, as some European city centers have several blocks or streets that are, or that become pop-ups in North American cities sometimes. There are cars on it, there's parking on it, but it is a extremely car hazardous place in terms of time and ability to get around, and it is terrible to get there by any mode of transportation. It takes forever to get there by transit. It takes forever to get there on foot if you have to, and there's all kinds of angst about this, and yet nevertheless it persists as a jewel in the downtown Vancouver crown in terms of both local and out of town tourist activities and general fun about town, especially on a nice day like Canada Day that we just had, and for things like the Vancouver Jazz Festival. Now, the whole reason we're talking about this is because we watched Uite Lee's About Here video titled The Uncertain Future of Granville Island. And it addresses so much of why the festival has found its home there. And I learned some things about Granville Island that I wasn't cognizant of until watching the video. So I really enjoyed it. I can't remember which one of us brought it to each other's attention, but we both follow Uite's channel anyway. So, we were primed to watch it, right?
Yep.
And what I jumped on right away was that Granville Island is owned solely, and there's a sole landlord of Granville Island, and that is the CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They, with a special council, have planned quotas for different land uses on the island, and they own the land. So it is a much more tightly engineered piece of civic property than a private development, and it always has been.
Yeah.
And that body has made decisions that facilitate things like the Vancouver Jazz Fest setting up shop there today. They give below market rents to things like art spaces to meet the quotas that they've laid out in their own master plans for how much space on Granville Island they want to lease to different types of businesses. And those extremely below market rents, I believe, allow the festival to use spaces without what would be the punitive cost of them trying to go out on the open market and figure out where to host their festival.
Right. That blew my mind when I learned that it's the CMHC. And looking into this, did you find, does the CMHC hold other properties like this, or is this like a really one-off case? Do you know?
I don't know, but it's good to know that everybody's mortgage insurance has made this all possible.
Yeah, it's a really funny institution that, I guess I can see, it's obviously holds the property or whatever, but it's just a very unusual for the CMHC to be the sole owner of this.
Yeah. Now they do their master planning, like I just alluded to in passing, and this YouTube video talks a little bit about a plan they made in 2016 where they have some visions about developing even more buildings on Granville Island and a couple of ways they could improve the experience of getting there. And my favorite one of those projects is building some sort of elevator system to go from the bridge deck of the Granville Street Bridge directly down to Granville Island, which if you can then get people onto the Granville Street Bridge, and if there's enough room for people to walk and bike and whatever and get off the bus there, it's a lot easier for them to get onto the island than it currently is. So that's kind of funny. It's almost like an even more funny over the top solution than like people talk about building a gondola to Simon Fraser University, right?
Yeah, the space tower from the bridge down. That doesn't solve the problem because where you're going to park, this is now you're getting to niche Vancouver. You're still going to have to park in the same area. Presumably you don't want to park on the island, which is just like the area around the base of the bridge and then walk up the bridge elevator down when that's very funny.
Yeah, it does not solve the issue of getting there from south of Granville Island. It maybe does from downtown to some extent, but for everybody who's coming by car, it doesn't really solve the issue of where those people are going to park anyways, especially if you're going to remove existing parking to make new developments, which by and large is a net positive, value move, but It still requires some sort of answer for how people are going to get there. And like if we were fully like an urban affairs podcast, we could extend this discussion into like there's a mega development planned south of the Burrard Bridge by an indigenous led group that actually the name of the development is the same as like the indigenous name for the land that Granville Island now sits on, according to this YouTube video, ironically enough. But the size of that development poses similar infrastructure problems in the same kind of area. Yeah. But that is probably too big fish for us to fry. I think the first thing that I latched onto is that the problem presented in this video is that buildings on Granville Island are going vacant or getting torn down because they're in disrepair, because there's a lack of renos and repairs. These buildings were built in the same time period, and there's a question of maintenance, which kind of goes back to the strong towns discussion we've had. There's a question of how to fund that. That kind of goes back to when we talked about the transit plebiscite, right? Yeah. So these kind of funding issues. And because Granville Island is a public land works, basically, there isn't the same free market incentive for developers to have done any of that over the last 40 to 50 years. Yep. And Uite kind of reveals that. I have this direct quote from him from the video that I thought was pretty funny, where this is what he says. Granville Island's business model was designed to cover its day-to-day operating costs, which allowed it to run without any costs to taxpayers for over 40 years, but it wasn't designed to face a challenge like this. That's what he said. Right. I think that's a revealing quote, because if it wasn't designed to face a challenge like this, that means it wasn't designed very well. That means it kind of failed the strong towns test. Yeah. And that's what I got out of hearing him talk about that. And then he kind of mocks the idea of going full on capitalist to solve the problem, and he presents some different angles that you could take in response to that. And ultimately, he reveals that the video was produced in partnership, like as lead generating content for a survey about Granville Island that he links. And the survey seeks to find cause and support for what they call a Granville Island Foundation, a charitable organization that could do fundraising for capital improvement to fund the continued existence of Granville Island as we know it today. So that is what I understand the premise of the video to be. What do you think about the problem that he poses and the dichotomy and everything about how we could look at this from there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I mean, like to more maybe draw out the exact nature of the problem as Ute posed it, is like, because this is like subsidized and, arts focused, these are organizations like that, are not like profitable. That's like kind of the cause of disrepair, right? So their options are to either like make it less of an arts focused thing. Also, I believe in the charter or in these kind of master plans, um, like big corporations and chains are not permitted to operate on Granville Island. There's no Lululemon store, there's no McDonald's or A&W. These are small businesses, and that's by design. But presumably a Lululemon flagship in the former Emily Carr building would like pay enough property taxes or whatever to like, or I don't know exactly what the tax structure is, potentially pay enough fees or rent to solve this problem, right? And so the question is like, should Granville Island change what type of a place it is? Which is, I think, if you're a visiting tourist, it's very quaint and nice to like go to one of these public markets that feels maybe out of a different time, where there's no Starbucks and there's no McDonald's, and there's instead like Lee's Donuts and a bunch of cool grocers and fishmongers and whatnot, and art spaces. So do you take that away, take some of that character away in favor of like making it sustainable by just inviting major higher capital players in there, and kind of what's lost in that? I mean, it's a very interesting problem, because like it was those 40 years felt probably pretty utopian on Granville Island, with no one thinking about like the maintenance and operating costs of these aging buildings, and just now it's realizing like, okay, if we do nothing, then this place just loses its character no matter what, right? If it just continues down, then this place just kind of falls apart and no one wants to visit it because there's like going to be like rats in the market. That would not be a nice place to visit anymore. And so I think in Granville Island's case, there's probably sufficient public will to, kind of create something. I think people don't want there to be big box stores or chain restaurants on the island, I would guess. I would think if you like,
I would agree,
polled the public, they would say like, keep it as much as it is as possible. So, making some sort of foundation, I think makes sense. I don't know. What do you think? What do you see the problems are with that?
Well, when I think about Granville Island today, not thinking about the history of it, I think about what are some other places around the region that have a similar pull to crowds of folks today. And there's one that has emerged in recent years that I want to single out as kind of another place that's like this. And it's the Shipyards, that's run by the Lower Lonsdale BIA and City of North Vancouver. How familiar are you with the Shipyards?
Very familiar. I mean, I've been there quite a few times. Saw it through its kind of development, because I was living in North Van kind of right as it was getting started, and then it's now blossomed. But Shipyards has kind of been lauded as like one of the only such success stories, and certainly in like Western Canada in the last few years, as far as like urban planning and public space planning.
Yeah, because the Shipyards it coexists with Lonsdale Quay, which is an existing popular space that has been around for quite some time, but it's almost just leveled that up by a lot. And I think the Shipyards is now known as a place where there are a lot of live music events. There's a lot of community market events at Christmas time and at other times, night markets.
Yep.
It is perhaps the capitalist dream alternative to Granville Island, if you look at it that way.
Interesting. Well, because they have, there's a Tap and Barrel there, and a Joey's, and a kind of, again, bigger players, you might say. Although there still isn't, I don't think, anything super chain. And I don't know if that's in the charter or not, or just happens to be the people that want to open restaurants in North Van.
Yeah, I don't know much about the planning journey to the Shipyards as opposed to like the history of Granville Island. That would be an interesting thing to nerd out about, to really compare the two. But in my mind right now, it feels like the Shipyards is kind of eating Granville Island's lunch in a lot of ways, because it's a lot easier to get there, which is hilarious to say about a place on the North Shore. But I mean, you can take the sea bus there from downtown, and it just seems like a place that is able to attract people in that way.
Yeah, people want to go to the Shipyards, both locals and tourists. I think the thing about Granville Island, I was saying, like I have no occasion to go to Granville Island, and in fact, if someone invited me to go, if someone was visiting the city, and this was not their first time to Granville Island, they asked if I wanted to go to Granville Island with them, I would say no thanks. I'll see you after after you're done there, because it's a nightmare to get there. And it's just a really busy public market. But the shipyards is lovely. It's like open space, and there's stuff going on. And sometimes I'll meet my friends there to go see music on a Friday night or go to the night market. And so shipyards has more of that like local and visitor appeal. I think you're right that it's eating Granville Island's lunch, and I wonder like what lessons Granville Island could learn from that without, because when the vision Ute lays out kind of is like, do we want this to become like Vancouver's Times Square, right? Do we want like billboards and McDonald's and Starbucks and all these things on the island? And of course, like no one really wants that, and that's not what shipyards is like at all. There's like Western Canada's largest restaurant, I think Tap and Barrel, with like over 500 seats, is a very, very large and very lucrative business. And yet it has a local flavor, right? Like the Tap and Barrel does not feel like, I don't know, even like the Keg or something. People might argue that. I don't know. I don't know. Not everyone's a fan of.
I have a point to introduce, which is that the restaurant Bridges on Granville Island has become a Tap and Barrel.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. So there already is that. And so, yeah, clearly, I guess Tap and Barrel qualifies for like being local and small enough. I don't know what else would preclude a business from opening there. So I think it's a good example. I don't know if that shipyards is just like better positioned.
Well, here's the thing, right? On that front, that's a good point, because on one hand, there's a bus loop at the Lonsdale Quay that's right there. So there's the North Shore's transit hub is there, at least North Vancouver's, and people live in proximity. I don't know how much of it is a zoning story versus how much of it is an infrastructure story of why nobody lives on Granville Island or lives in the surrounding area. I don't know how much will there is to change that, or even how feasible it is, like if there's infrastructure to support X number of people living there. But if you look at it from a bird's eye view, that's got to be one of the big differences, right?
Yeah.
Let alone the transit hub. That's going to help get some people there, C-Bus, but also like people live in Lower Lonsdale.
Yeah.
People don't live on or near Granville Island.
Well, and the density of condo towers that were built as a part of the shipyards project, like you could fill the shipyards with just the people who live walking distance to them, or people who can walk out of their front door of their building and be at the shipyards. It's called condo towers.
Yeah. Year round. They kind of underwrite the community.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. And there's got to be a lot of reasons for that, and that's not easy to change. I think we can move on, but the last thing I want to throw out, I'll just like drop something big here as we exit, which is I think the CMHC and the feds and whoever's in charge there should seriously be considering divesting themselves of Granville Island, of selling the land. Whether piecemeal or in larger chunks, and seeing what happens. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's very much will for that to happen, but I think it would probably be an interesting idea. It would probably raise a lot of revenue for the government, and it would probably unlock the space into some new directions. Where would the Jazz Festival go? That's a very good question, but there'd be a lot of open questions if that happened.
Well, we'll see what happens with Granville Island in the next couple of years. I don't know how is the clock ticking on this? Are we looking at like a 10-year horizon of kind of make or break, do you think? I don't know if Ute says that in the video or not, but
well, about 10 years ago, they were looking at a Granville Island 2040 oriented plan. So they still are going to be living out that plan for the next decade and a half to some extent, and then reevaluating it then. So there's a lot of runway before they would consider selling land, that's for sure, or making any major changes like that. There's like other big mega developments, like the Indigenous one that I referenced, they would be coming up during this time period too. So the environment around Granville Island will also look very, very different.
Well, stay tuned till 2040 when we'll report back on this story and what's happened since then. From Granville Island to Timbaland.
Whoa, that's a good one.
There's our transition. I was like, how do we pivot this one? There's another news item. This is a newsy episode. We got a few kind of current things. I mean, the Granville Island thing, newsy, I guess, because of the festival and stuff, but maybe not exactly contemporary. How much do you know about Timbaland pre this thing we're going to talk about, pre this controversy?
Apologize, One Republic.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Wow. I was thinking like Promiscuous Girl by Nelly Furtado. Wow, Apologize to One Republic. That's a great Timbaland pull.
That's all I got.
That's all you got. I mean, he's made some really... Timbaland is a hip-hop producer, for anyone not in the know. He's got this like really signature sound, I think, which is like these very kind of hard-knocking drums. If he's not from New York, it's a style that's associated with the East Coast, and he's produced for Jay-Z, many artists. I mean, I can, too many to name. Iconic, and for a long time, well liked as just like, hey, if Timbaland's making a record, it's probably worth checking out. Timbaland's gotten himself into a couple pieces of hot water, all kind of circling around the issues of AI, and kind of maybe precipitated when he announced that he had like started this company called Stage Zero with some of his collaborators, co-founded, and they had quote unquote like signed an AI artist named Tata. So this is, what that means is like this artist doesn't exist. This is not a real person. This isn't like using a real person's image or voice or anything. This is like a fictional character. There's no music out yet. And he announced this, and some people rolled their eyes. There was some blowback. There's a good article in NPR by Sheldon Pierce about this. Basically just saying kind of read the room. You and I have talked a little bit about AI and music on our episode of this show, talking about the Patrick Bartley jazz memes controversy.
Yep.
And, one of our conclusions was just like, just ignore it, or like let it be bad, and like it'll be people will just figure out that this is like tacky and no one wants this. And Timbaland has ignored all that and said, "I'm gonna
hold my beer."
He said, "Hold my beer. I'm gonna make an AI artist and do that." So first of all, do you have any reactions to like that news that we're gonna have to be listening to real, like transparently? We're gonna talk a little in a minute about AI artists that are popular that are maybe trying to conceal that fact, but just transparently, like this artist doesn't exist, but they're a pop star.
Yeah, the word sign doesn't have any meaning there anymore, right? Because it doesn't represent a agreement between two humans or two parties with humans behind them. Signing is just a term to make it sound like that. It doesn't mean anything because it's still just the same people manipulating different softwares to generate stuff that is their intellectual property once it falls onto a human, right? Now, the problem could be, well, what is the inputs into those AI softwares that are generating that stuff? And are there people behind there? And where did that come from?
Yes. I wanted to say also, as like a additional background on this, that Timbaland's like not the first person to do something like this. Are you familiar with Lil McKella?
No. Oh, yes, actually. Yes. Lil
McKella is an AI influencer that actually kind of predates this generation of generative AI. I think Lil McKella was created by like a kind of a creative agency, kind of a marketing agency, as this kind of proof of concept almost. Basically an AI influencer, or like an influencer who doesn't exist. I don't even know if they used the word AI when she first started doing her thing. She's got an Instagram account with like over 1 million, I think it's like 2 million followers or something. And it's meant to be provocative. as far as, elicit a reaction from people who either don't realize it's not real at first and then realize, oh my goodness, this person's not real. There was some controversy. Lil McKella, again in quotes, had leukemia, and that did not go over well because actual cancer patients were like, what a weird thing to say. Like, obviously she doesn't exist, and so she does not have leukemia. And so this like weird kind of, it's like transparently clout chasing that, again, I think she tried to kind of spin to say, well, no, I want to like raise awareness or something, talk about people who do have leukemia, and kind of maybe pivoted a little bit from this. It's a very, I'll say, interesting story for Lil McKella. There's not much to say about Tata yet because Timbaland hasn't done anything beyond announcing that this is happening, and we've seen like an image of Tata, who's like a woman with purplish pink hair and looks very AI generated. That's kind of all there is to say about Tata. So no like actual controversies about the ethics of like what Tata's marketing or the music or whatever. But you raised a good point of like, who, when it's music being made by AI, and Timbaland uses Suno primarily as kind of his tool of choice. In fact, he calls it, I believe he calls it Baby Timbo. I don't know. Did you read that in the article?
Oh boy.
He kind of thinks of Suno as like a collaborator that he can pass things to. So, as with all things generative AI, it cannot be divorced from real creators who are actually making music, right? At the end of the day, whatever Tata's music is going to be, it's going to be the result of human musicians whose works were fed into Suno and output. Which, we will get into now, because a couple artists have kind of claimed, I think successfully in one case, that Timbaland kind of, without their permission, put their work into his AI tool, Baby Timbo, or again, it's just Suno. Suno is the name. It's a big AI audio company. Kind of without their permission, uploaded them and either used their music, used their voice to create other works that they're not down with. And it does not look great for Timbaland, I'll say.
No, because there's one artist in particular who's come out and talked about how her voice ended up being manipulated into stuff that she would never have authorized, right? That's where this kind of came to a head.
Exactly, yeah. So the artist, Zara Scully, we'll put kind of links to all of this because there's a lot to go through in YouTube interviews and whatnot. She's kind of like an up-and-coming singer in LA who was featured on, so Timbaland does these like, I think it's Instagram Lives, maybe he also does Twitch sometimes as well, where he will like listen to emerging artists and producers. And I actually, I don't think I ever participated in, but I used to watch these kind of around 2020 where Timbaland, it was very cool to see a legendary producer in his studio just listening to beats made by just like regular Joes. And he would say if he liked it, say if he didn't like it, and move on. So this Zara Scully was kind of discovered through one of these live events, and I guess got to talking to Timbaland, and he wanted to like work on this song that she had with her and maybe look at promoting or releasing it or potentially signing her catalog or something. And eventually she heard, well, he was transparent that he said, I'm, putting this into what he calls Baby Timbo. And manipulating it a little bit, trying to change her voice, maybe different accents, different inflections, different production styles. And, nothing came of that. But later on, one of Timbaland's kind of frequent collaborators and co-founder of Stage Zero put out a snippet of a song, and Zara recognized her voice. Like, it's quite transparently her kind of her timbre, not singing words that she sang. This is a song that he wrote. This is the artist. Creator God is his Instagram handle. Zaid Portillo is the actual is the actual gentleman. And so she recognizes, hey, I'm pretty sure this is me. Like my voice got put into Timbaland's Suno and got trained into that model, and is now out there in a song that like I had nothing to do with and don't really want to be a part of. And I think kind of got ghosted basically by Timbaland after asking about that.
Wow.
So that's one case. There's a second case. So Timbaland, I think, hasn't publicly said anything about this case at the time. Another producer, K Fresh, had a very similar experience where something K Fresh produced. Again, I think it was an artist that showed Timbaland something that K Fresh had produced, and then Timbaland once again fed it into Suno, and some output down the road included, like, transparently was fed off of K Fresh's training material because it included K Fresh's producer tag. The producer tag, if you don't listen to instrumental hip hop or hip hop, is like a producer will put in maybe their name at the beginning of a song, so you know who produced it. There's Metro Boomin's maybe the most famous, or DJ Mustard,
DJ Khaled,
just saying DJ Khaled, or the DJ Mustard, the yell of mustard in the Kendrick Lamar song,
which I had explained to me after the Super Bowl. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, you were wondering why why we're talking about condiments. So yeah, K Fresh's producer tag made it into the output of one of Timbaland's kind of AI projects, and so him and an attorney penned a letter to Timbaland and said, "Hey, this isn't cool. This was not authorized. It also violates Suno's terms of use. So Suno kind of mandates that you're the whole owner of anything you're uploading into it. Clearly, not enforced, right? Like, or not hard enforced. But that's an interesting detail. So Suno, I think, is trying to legally cover their own butts, because obviously, if it's a tool that's being used for effectively piracy or copyright violation, then they're going to be in more hot water. So they have to say, make sure you own the rights to any music you're uploading into here, which Timbaland obviously didn't in both of these cases, but it sounds like maybe had tacit permission from the younger artist Zara Scully, and certainly no permission from K Fresh. And so, yeah, Timbaland issued an apology to K Fresh after the letter from his attorney, kind of saying like, "Oh, I didn't know that this wasn't." I think Timbaland claimed to "Oh, I thought that whoever was showing it to me had, full ownership or whatever, and I didn't know this was produced by someone else." Bit of a weak cop out, but it's I guess my main takeaway from this is that we talk about AI as like potentially as a tool for artists, right? That's like the AI maxi version of this, right? Is that like, well, one day it's going to be just a collaborator, right? And that's how Timbaland certainly sees it. He talks about it as, there's real productions from artists he admires, and he can put it into Suno and play with it, reproduce things, remix it. There's another YouTube video where Timbaland's talking about being able to do a remix with an artist who lived in London, and this is with that artist's permission, but he just like runs it through Suno 3 times, and he's got 3 very different versions of the same song using her vocal. But really, this just enables bad actors to be bad much more easily, right? This isn't like copyright violation, because copyrights wasn't built for this, and so if Zara Scully can't sue Timbaland for this, K Fresh maybe had some legal recourse here. Again, the evidence being like his producer tag was in it, but it'd be a pretty tough case for either of those two.
Yeah, it's not always going to be this obvious either. Like, how would it even be possible in so many cases for him to clear ownership of it, whatever that would mean? Like, if you didn't want to violate the TOS and use Suno, if the TOS was actually to be enforced, how would you assert ownership if you had it collaborated with somebody? Would you have to somehow identify whose stems contributed significantly to the stuff that you got as output from the model? Like, I mean, in this case, if you trained it on somebody's voice in particular, maybe you can make the case that, he could own it legally, and it could be legal even if it remains unethical if he paid her however much money
Right.
they agreed that was worth, and then he could in theory have license from her to manipulate her voice. But again, she would have to not only agree to that, but also get compensated for it to be kind of legal in the traditional sense. But if you're just taking output from the model and these other things are popping up into it, how could you possibly assert ownership of it and compensate whoever needed to be compensated? This is the whole big problem of so much of this content in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so dicey. And, it really just shows like I think especially in, music and creative acts, it's never, the AI is really just other people's output. And I think we're seeing this increasingly, like the New York Times is obviously suing OpenAI for copyright violation. And part of that is like they can find evidence, snippets of their articles in the output of OpenAI. OpenAI was summarizing New York Times articles, having crawled the website, and would sometimes spit out whole blocks of text from it when explaining an issue that the New York Times had reported on. And this is always going to be the case, right? So like models of this size are always going to have these ethical issues, and they're not neutral, right? These are however you feel about piracy and stealing, right? Because we are the generation that grew up on, I always feel weird finger wagging because like I don't know what the statute of limitations on, but like I'm certainly acquired some music in some dubious ways at points in my life. And so I hate to finger wag at someone who's trying this too heavily, but I think now I'm older, more mature, and I pay for my music now. Yeah, it's dicey. It's not good stuff.
Well, the overly simplified political alibi for it is that this is piracy punching down, right? Like punching down is basically just attacking the people that the left likes or whatever, and punching up is attacking the people that they don't like. Right. But you could frame this as like this is piracy punching down because it's Timbaland pirating from a collaborator who is less successful or whatever. But what we did when we were kids was piracy punching up because we were stealing from the majors, and so on, right? And that even gets into Mood Machine when they talk about the history of the Pirate Bay and things like that. A lot of the anti-streaming activism orients itself along this line where there was good piracy punching up, and now the AI is like the pirate punching down. It's kind of a funny inversion of what was the common music experience or media consumption experience 20 to 25 years ago. But I mean, there is a kernel of truth to it for sure.
I guess my final thing to say on this, and I'm sure Timbaland will not be the last kind of big artist or big industry player to kind of try to embrace these AI tools, is like, who wants this, right? Who's asking for Timbaland to put out AI generated Suno music, right? Timbaland is a great music producer. I would love to hear some more Timbaland music that's just Timbaland and not AI assisted. And in the NPR article, there's a paragraph where I think Timbaland kind of admits this is maybe his last ditch attempt at relevancy, and which is a bummer to hear because I think he would be very relevant if he just kept putting out bangers. He's very capable of writing great music. I think he's maybe kind of seeing the tide of some of the other industry trends we talked about, and maybe some of the sounds, the way that just hip hop production is going, and younger artists maybe are less keen to work with Timbaland, who's getting on a little bit as far as producers go. But man, I think everyone would much rather just have him be himself.
Well, like, would you ever do this? Like, whether you were you today or whether you were closer to Timbaland in stature, would you ever feel comfortable doing this? Like, you collaborate with somebody, you get vocal stems to produce a track with them, and then you end up like feeding them into Suno and then creating new output without like consulting or compensating the person. Like, it's when you actually think about it that way, it's like, oh man, this is weird.
It's really weird. And I think what we're seeing, is like there are these people that are becoming completely AI brained, and that they actually cannot see their actions with this stuff very clearly. And I maybe see this more kind of like I work in tech spaces, and so at the moment, investors and shareholders and higher ups in the companies, by extension, are really keen on who's using the most AI. And you'll hear companies that have nothing to do with AI, like my last shop, say like, we're an AI first company. We want to be using AI. And so the people who are using the AI the most are put in the highest positions, and they start doing stuff and building stuff that's either like not secure or not very good, or sometimes it is just fine. It's just like fast and ethically gray, because it's like, where did this code come from? If you think too hard about that, you're like, okay, yeah, some actual software developer somewhere that's like maybe should be compensated. That's maybe messier to get into than we
but it's
right
impossible
now.
Yeah,
but they're just AI brain. They cannot, if you bring up any of this stuff of like, hey, why don't we slow down, how to write good code, why don't you write the code, like this type of thing. No one wants to hear it. They become they lose that critical thinking about what they're doing. And I see that with Timbaland. It's wild. It's like nonsense behavior.
So many new technologies are amplifications of existing problems in new ways rather than being total game changers. And this is an example that points toward that, where in the past you would have to have superhuman production skills to be able to do this with somebody's voice. But if you were creepy enough, you still could if you had those superhuman abilities. But now AI is empowering you to be able to do this.
And if you're, I was like, small artists are exploited by bigger artists all the time, and producers, and get in bad deals, and, music gets released and someone signed a contract that they shouldn't have. This just accelerates that problem, right? It just makes that much faster, much easier to be malicious. It's wild.
We should be really happy that it didn't exist in the 90s when Kenny G did his thing where he blew over Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World, or he could have like made a whole new track featuring Louis and like soloed over it.
Man, Kenny G, I'm sure we got to look up what Kenny G thinks about AI.
What's Kenny G's take on AI?
Kenny G should be worried. I feel like AI, that's coming for smooth jazz first.
It's coming for him.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
All right.
Okay.
What else we got?
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What is the one thing that Ben Jordan and Rick Beato completely agree on?
They agree that Velvet Sundown is an AI band.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is arguably the biggest story that we're talking about today. I don't know if we need to spend as much time on it as some of the other ones, but we saved it for last because this is getting a lot of attention. It contains some other exhausting themes that we've talked about, like monthly listeners and how useless that idea is. That's being borne out a lot in how people are talking about this story. But I can run it down because I discovered it relatively recently too, as I came out of my jazz festival experiences here. The Velvet Sundown are a band, a profile. They have 2 albums, which regular people wouldn't do it this way, came out 15 days apart. Their first album, Floating on Echoes, came out on June 5th, and their second album, Dust and Silence, came out on June 20th. So this has all happened in the previous month. Again, people saying like, oh, it's only been 2 weeks and they already have 500,000 monthly listeners. It's like, yeah, right. that kind of proves that monthly and listeners are both kind of words that aren't helping you there. But anyway, the track that got the most attention is called Dust on the Wind, very similar to Dust in the Wind by Kansas. And it sounds like a kind of country rock song, I guess you could say.
Yep.
And the article that I went to learn more about it was from Music Ally, and it was by Stuart Dredge there. And that article is titled "The Velvet Sundown Are a Seemingly AI-Generated Band with 325,000 Spotify listeners." That piece is interesting, I think, the most because it breaks down how a lot of very potent, and by potent, I mean bot-fueled, paid playlist marketing drove the breakout of this band that has an AI face, in that their imagery is AI generated, their bio is too. There's no real person. This is almost like a PFC or a fake artist.
Yeah.
This is like the next Pokemon evolution of that concept
Yeah.
here, where you've created a full-on persona for an artist profile, and you place that music, like there's dozens of tracks from this band's 2 albums, place them onto playlists that are all run by playlist companies that probably sell, big ticket bought playlist placements
Yeah.
to blow up this band artificially. And then the story gets further juiced by just the what you would call earned media of we're all freaking out about how this band is like AI generated or not, and we're talking about it. And
Right.
as we talk about it, we go listen to them. And so that has kept their cycle going for another couple weeks here, where now everybody's talking about this anonymous band. And, Ben and Rick have both proven, quote unquote, in their own ways that the music was generated by something like a Suno or a Udio.
Yeah.
Ben by analyzing it with his own proprietary tools, which is pretty cool, but I don't really know anything about. And Rick by using Logic to split up the stems and listening for artifacts in the stems that make them sound like they weren't ever tracked by real people. Yeah. They are also supposedly tweeting. They have an X account, Velvet_Sundown. And the thing about that is that it's impossible to tell whether it's a parody account or not, and it really does kind of seem like it is. So you can't really say, although they're tweeting things like, hey, journalists, come talk to us, DM us, and like we're happy about all the inquiries from reporters we're getting. But obviously this is X we're talking about here, so this could be a joke. So nobody knows what's going on, but this is definitely the story of the time since we last recorded an episode.
You said they're anonymous. They're not anonymous. It's formed by singer and mellotron player Gabe Farrow, guitarist Lenny West, Milo Raines, who crafts the band's textured synth sounds, and free-spirited percussionist Orion Rio Del Mar.
My apologies.
I've been described as a free-spirited percussionist once or twice in my day, I'm sure.
I'm going to use that as all these bits about how people are introducing each other that, this will be one that I can use for you next time I have to.
Yeah, this is... I first saw this on an Instagram reel where someone was posting about it. Someone was saying, hey, I think this band is fake. Well, I don't think it was the original one, actually. I think it was probably this knock-on. There was an original, I think a guitarist kind of found this and said, who are these guys? Clearly it's AI. So the video I saw was probably someone who saw that video was also reporting on it. And the comments of that distressed me a little bit, which is just everyone, we can't say this enough, everyone needs to read Mood Machine. Everyone is very surprised by this or has the wrong idea about like who is doing this or like what should be done and what the real problem is here. Some people will be like, you should report this to Spotify. Spotify knows. Spotify does this themselves, right? Like, or is hoping to do this themselves. Or people being like, are you sure? This type of thing. And I think it really revealed to me that like the average person is still really not super well read on this issue. And I think this is about to become like an epidemic, because it's very easy to pull off, right? AI generated bio, AI generated images of the band, AI generated songs, and then, you pay some bots and you're committing streaming fraud. But it's the bot companies that are perpetuating the streaming fraud, not
and
you.
And Spotify has no incentive to prevent streaming fraud. That's another thing that we've talked about too, because it continues to juice the listener metrics.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's like we were saying with this other stuff, like no one wants this really. These, play numbers are artificially inflated, although now they're legitimately inflated by people going to check this out because they've heard it. I went to check if I had managed to pause before 30 seconds. I made it in a minute and a half. And so that's a play.
Oh, you gave them one stream.
I became one stream. It was just too catchy. It was the free-spirited percussionist got my ear, and I thought, man, this guy's free-spirited. Gotta hear more.
So, hold on here. What were you saying is the prevailing kind of assumption that shows that this topic has moved fast and that you're not into it? Is it that it comes, people are thinking like it comes from some like AI bot the music is like generated by a company from like some AI bot program, as opposed to like it just being a person who, like, instead of putting their own thing out into the world, is just like putting out something that they've generated on all fronts? Or what were you alluding to there?
I was just seeing a lot of comments of just like general confusion and surprise about this. And I think this is not confusing or surprising, because this is either an individual or a company that's doing this. And it doesn't matter. And it certainly doesn't matter to Spotify. And it shouldn't matter to you as a listener. And it's not surprising because we have perfect fit content. This is, like you said, this is the evolution of PFC, where perfect fit content kind of took great pains so that you wouldn't. There was kind of like
the artists were super anonymous. There was no bio.
Yeah.
There was nothing.
Or there was
just the most minimal artwork.
Yeah. I mean, Liz wrote about one, there's a couple artists that had these very silly, that kind of came from Epidemic Sound, clearly, like these like little hacky bios, but they also were quite clearly fake. But really, they didn't encourage you to like follow the band, really. Like you wouldn't follow one of those artist profiles. They're meant to just come up on playlists and fill those out. And this is different. So
is this like PFC meets Little Michaela, or the other thing that we were talking about, kind of?
I think so. I think this is something like that. And again, like, whoever's running the Twitter account, like maybe that's the person who made this AI band, and maybe that's someone completely random. Tough to know. And it seems like a parody account because they keep, like, it's indefensibly AI. And they keep saying it's not AI. It's like, why would you, if you were perpetuating this, why would you be arguing that when you could be proven wrong quite quickly? Yeah, it's, I don't know. The more I think about it, it's just like, it's going to make these streaming services. This is actually not just a Spotify problem. They're on all streaming services, I believe, including like Deezer, which has some AI detection tools, and so we'll note and say, hey, some of these tracks are AI generated. So the more I'm, think about this, the more I'm like, I gotta stop using streaming, because this is going to become a bigger and bigger problem.
Yeah, there is another angle of it that it doesn't really have that much to do with Spotify. And it's another way where Spotify kind of gets outsized attention because they have that freaking monthly listener figure, and that they're the biggest platform where people observe this, and that kind of becomes the bugaboo. But obviously this is going out to all streaming platforms, right? They uploaded it through DistroKid, right? So there's a person behind the curtain who generated all the materials and created this profile on all streaming platforms. So there's nothing that's unique to Spotify about this. Spotify does have the worst incentives to prevent more stuff like this from happening in the future. That said, it doesn't pertain directly to Spotify. It's just about the enhanced capabilities of the full suite of generating stuff with AI and how somebody could deploy this. I still think, I'm biased too because of my vocation, but like the marketing aspect of it is the most interesting. That there is an ecosystem of bot playlisters. I guess that does pertain directly to Spotify. There you go. Okay, so this is the part that is about Spotify, is that there's an ecosystem of bot playlisters where either they are the ones who created the Velvet Sundown, and so they're almost like PFCing themselves as part of their exploitation of the Spotify system, and like just filling their bot playlist with AI content that they make, and like you could even conspiratorially say, like, trying to gin up this story to like boost it even further. This could be a project of the playlisters themselves, or it could be an artist striking a deal with these playlisters and paying them for it and stuff. And so then there becomes like this underground market of like artists who just want to profit on streams, but without doing anything that resembles a real human artist career, and like bot playlisters, and like that's almost like the dead internet theory of streaming at that point. It's like that becomes such a large percentage of all streams, and then it's just a wasteland. So this is like an accelerationist moment in the history of streaming. Like, it seems to be driving a lot of the stuff that we've talked about toward something. And man, it's going to be really off-putting and strange, but also interesting to see what it is.
I think, to say that it has not much to do with Spotify is right on the one sense. Where it does have more to do with Spotify is Spotify has actively said they're pursuing this stuff in-house. Like, eventually Spotify wants to make bands like what are they called? Velvet. So,
They're facilitating this in house, not actively pursuing trying to stamp it out, but they want to do it in house.
No, they want to. Spotify has said they would like to start doing AI generated PFC. So, and that could include the profiles and the bios and whatever, because again, they don't want to have to pay royalties out to an artist, which goes back to the Timbaland thing. Right? That's why we sign an AI artist. Is like that's just a pop singer that you don't have to pay. And so Spotify, their business model kind of relies on and more of this stuff happening on their platform. They just want to be the ones doing it. And I think you're right to say that because it's on other platforms and there's a DistroKid upload. Spotify is very unlikely to be the ones behind this. But they will be, like they fully intend on that being part of their business model.
How do you feel about this if you're DistroKid, if you're the distributor? Do you care?
They should care because they're very incentivized to not get in trouble with Spotify. If this gets enough negative attention, because Spotify does have something in their TOS about, or maybe it's DistroKid has stuff in their TOS about don't upload stuff you didn't make. And so if there's enough negative backlash or whatever, and DistroKid has to take it down, or Spotify forces DistroKid to take it down, DistroKid has to preserve that relationship with Spotify, or every artist that has music through DistroKid gets their stuff removed from Spotify. So I think DistroKid should be worried about this. And if I was DistroKid, you would probably be tracking down the customer that uploaded this and saying, hey, don't do that. But at the same time, there's probably people inside of DistroKid who are saying, like, we get paid the same, right? Like, that's just another subscriber to them. Do the distributors get a cut of streaming royalty as well? They do, right? On top of what we pay the...
Depends. I mean, DistroKid does not. DistroKid lives off of just annual fees, flat fee. Like a CD Baby does take a single-digit percentage. Different business models over time.
Okay. Yeah. So DistroKid doesn't exactly profit. Although, like, whoever's paying the DistroKid membership, obviously they kick that person off the platform, they lose that customer, and software businesses don't like that kind of churn. But
yeah, so the thing is, like, okay, this Velvet Sundown, it's not like Spotify put them on any editorial playlists or any streaming platform did, to grow this. And like, as an end user, it's the verification check is pretty easy here. It's like you can search around and figure out if what you're listening to has a identifiable human story behind it or not, like to some extent. Like, we can do that. So I mean, as an individual user, this stuff is not cramping your style all that much. It's just kind of a crazy story that this was used to do such numbers at this point. But do you see this as like the dam is starting to break in terms of it will be harder and harder to figure out who is real, whatever that means?
Yeah, I think it'll just reach a fever pitch of so many of these being created at once that, like, it'd be whack-a-mole to try to catch them all, right? Like, an individual person, which there was that case of streaming fraud, could make, like, dozens, hundreds, a sufficiently motivated person of these artists, right? And then if like 30 of them get taken down, that's fine. I have 180 more. So I think it gets worse, right? It is this, like, the dead internet is a good comparison, where these streaming services, and it just makes me happy to think that, like, hey, you and I are like two of the people making like artisanal handmade music, right? Like, this is, going to become a specialty one day. Hard to acquire.
It's not going to be on streaming. We're not even going to put it there. People are finally going to break in terms of like thinking it's something they have to do.
Yeah, it's like, you want the good stuff, you got to come find us on Bandcamp or talk to us at a show or whatever. Because the dead mall where you get all the AI music will be nowhere that anyone wants to hang out if they're cool and actually into music.
Yeah, and those festival ADs that aren't cool, they're still going to look at your monthly listeners and figure out whether or not they should book you.
They will. That might shift, though. That might be, maybe that's a hope for music journalism, is eventually if everything's AI and you can't tell or you can't find the things you would like to listen to, that you're going to need like journalism and publications to tell you like, hey, here's someone put out some good music. Go check that out. Maybe it's full circle for music press.
Yeah. So speaking of that, we got to go to recommendations. So
Yes.
as we get out of here, what are you going to recommend in that vein? Putting on that hat for a second.
I have just begun checking out an album called Tether by an artist called Anastasia. Anastasia with an H in the Anna. Beautiful voice, really nice kind of like folky acoustic guitar stuff. I'm not even all the way through the record. That I started listening to it just today. It's great. Enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I've got one that I'm going to recommend to an album that I think will continue to grow on me. And we even had an exchange about it too. I think I just didn't have the chance to let this one get to me yet, but I was listening to a bunch of stuff when I was at your place by myself because you allowed me to house sit for you on your nice speakers, and I was listening to new album by the harpist Brandy Younger, Gadabout Season, which
Nice.
I now think is a great record, so I'm going to recommend that.
Awesome. I have also very much enjoyed that.
Yeah, she came to the Jazz Fest. I saw her in 2022 or 2023.
Yeah.
It was a good show.
I missed that one, but yeah, she's great.
All right, we really hit it there. Welcome back. We're going to be back next week as well. So let's go blast the Velvet Sundown and go camping and ride off into the sunset. I'm ready.
Okay, great. I'll see you next week.
See ya.